Lawyers of Reddit, what is a detail that your client failed to bring up to you that completely lost you the case? A friend of mine is a lawyer and he said that a client once turned up to court in the actual same outfit he was wearing in the burglary. When the CCTV footage come up in evidence, the client looked down to himself and was like, "Oh shit." Edit. My first ever awards. Cheers. Your Honor. I'd like to plead coincidence. Edit. Thanks for the awards. Folks, I will now make this into a comedy sketch. Unfair dismissal case. The client claimed to have been dismissed without reason or following procedure. After we had started the case, it comes out that not only was he given 3 written warnings but he was also called in for a disciplinary hearing before his dismissal. Don't lie to your lawyer. Had a similar case in regards to tenant law and an eviction order. Dude claimed he never got the written warnings of his landlord. 10 minutes into the case he admits not having checked his letterbox for months due to being over at his GF's place most of the time and was afraid to find letters of his landlord due to missing rent. Still got him a deferral to pay the missing rent in full within 30 days to avoid the eviction. Of course he did not. Sigh. Not a lawyer yet, but I clerked for a DA's office throughout law school. Obviously we don't have clients. But I'll never forget this kidnapping case I worked on. It involved 2 Asian male defendants who were both the same age and looked relatively similar. Witness is on the stand and is asked to identify where the defendant who pushed an Uzi into his face is seated. It's clear the witnesses is having trouble differentiating the defendants. In a true moment of brilliance, one defendant raises his f-king hand and basically points to himself like, "Right here bud." Hands down the dumbest shit I'd ever seen. I thought his defense attorney was going to have a brain aneurysm. That he filmed his offenses for his YouTube channel. The cops didn't even know. A witness brought it up on day 3 of a trial. It was a nice quick change of plea that afternoon. I'll never understand why people record any type of potential illegal act, much less post it on social media. I'm still a law student and this happened during my first internship at a court. A girl among other people was charged with drug possession, but because she had thrown away the drugs and the police couldn't prove that she bought or owned the drugs, BC it could have been one of the other people as well who still had drugs on them. The judge ruled in dubio pro reo. He then asked if she wants to add something and this girl asked if she can get her drugs back. The defense attorney looked like he was about to get a heart attack. Edit. For those wondering, I know what in dubio pro reo means, but I wasn't sure if they use the term in other countries and tried to explain it if not. This happened in Germany. Client in family law matter lied to me about using meth. Then used meth with a child in the room and the ex got footage of it on the nanny cam and then made excuses about why they couldn't do a drug test. Then blamed me when they lost custody. Despite the fact that they didn't show up to appointments or return my calls, so I couldn't prepare any court material. I dumped the client after that and left family law. A defendant was written a cell phone ticket while driving and defended himself. Your Honor, I was not using a smartphone while driving. I was actually using a flip phone. Double quote. Guilty. I'm a public defender in an area with lots of meth use. Meth makes most people talk. A lot. So I can't tell you how many clients forget to mention that they got to the jail still high and called their mom girlfriend buddy on the recorded jail phone and not only confessed to the crime, but also brainstormed whatever alibi or version of events I'm relying on to defend them. Edit. I'm seeing this question a lot, so I'll add some info here. This is not legal advice. Just explaining things a bit more. Calls to a lawyer are privileged and generally go through dedicated lines that aren't recorded. Depending on the facility. Calls to family, friends, etc. through the normal phones are not privileged, are generally recorded, and can be used in court. There are usually printed signs near the phones and a recorded warning before each call that this is the case. Employment law matter. He claimed to have been unfairly dismissed over bogus performance management. The real reason? He organized via Craigslist to have someone collect a box of his CM from a children's playground. There were explicit messages from him asking what they did with it, and whether they rubbed it all over themselves. The employer provided us the messages. Edit. He was doing this on company time. Case as a paralegal. Negligence case. Client argued that a lack of street lights and a cyclist he couldn't see was responsible for him hitting a wire pole. Upon discovery, the first respondent's report indicated that they found the driver in the driver's seat, pants down, with porn playing on the phone. Wasn't difficult to figure out who was negligent at that point. Not my client, but the son of the opposing party, and presumably the party himself, lied about being blind to make himself seem more sympathetic as a witness. We didn't know either until he took the witness box. Their counsel asked him to take the oath, and he picked the card up and read it. That was the cherry on top of a series of ridiculous events. The judge dismissed the whole thing in our client's favor shortly after. I was a trainee at the time, but my boss, who was in her late 60s then, said it was the most ridiculous case she'd ever handled. Had a woman with an expensive fur coat and she claimed that the laundry ruined it. It was kinda ruined, but the laundry claimed those stains were already there. Judge ordered an expert opinion, lab, and the fur coat had traces of cocaine and other illegal drugs all over it. There was a raid at her place then and her husband got convicted because they found several kg of drugs. I was involved in a hit and run car accident. My leg was pretty mangled. However, the driver of the car was caught. Turns out he was a rich kid who was driving his mum's convertible Porsche. Denied all knowledge of hitting me, etc. At the trial, the prosecutor asked him how long he had been driving, to which he answered, "Do you mean how long have I been driving legally or illegally?" The judge then went nuts asking why and when he had been driving illegally. His defense team sat down in their chairs and shook their heads. Needless to say, he lost the case. Interestingly, he died a year later by drowning. He had hired a speedboat and holiday, flipped it over and drowned. Turns out he was drunk at the time. Karma can be a cunt. This one ended my marriage. Well, it was the start of the end of marriage. My husband lost his job in the title mortgage business. Applied for unemployment. Got denied. I decided to help him with his appeal hearing. I asked him multiple times before the hearing, "Is there anything you did that caused them fire you?" He says no, absolutely not, they fired him out of nowhere. Hearing day comes. He testifies under oath that he did nothing wrong. Was a good employee. No issues. Upon cross-examination, the other attorney pulls out documents from one of his real estate closings. Documents he forged and backdated. Had to admit he perjured himself. Needless to say, he didn't get unemployment and he didn't sleep at home that night. Not a lawyer, but a woman I know received several hefty speeding fines. In my country, you can go see a magistrate to have the fines reduced if you plead poverty. She heard about this and decided to give it a shot. So she went to court and told the magistrate a sob story about not having enough money. The magistrate heard her out. Then he asked her, "Madam, what type of car do you drive?" Double quote. She replied in a tiny voice, "A Porsche." Double quote. Edit. Many have raised the fair point that a Porsche doesn't necessarily cost that much and isn't indicative of her financial status. So I'll add that it was not a beat up or old model at the time. She could have paid the fines without breaking the bank. She was just pushing her luck. She's a wealthy woman who just didn't want to pay her fines and the magistrate wasn't having any of it. Not me. But my dad represented a guy in a civil case. He doesn't normally do criminal law. But in this instance the question of a forged signature came up. And his client lied, saying he didn't forge it. My dad was very clear in explaining that admitting to him wouldn't land him in jail. It would just allow him to build a better defense. But he still denied forgery. And so my dad rolled with it. He said his case was completely cut up once it came out that yes, in fact, his client did forge the signature. And X200B. Guys and gals, your lawyers aren't a snitch. They're trying to get you the best possible result. Always be honest to your lawyer. Guy in prison hired me to request a modification of his sentence because he was doing very well, completing a lot of optional programs, no rule violations, etc. He had his family come in and pay and everything to get started. I asked the family and the client if he had requested modification before, because the law said that for his conviction, he could only request modification twice for any one sentence, regardless of if they were granted or denied. Swore up and down he'd never filed before. You can see where this is going. After spending a few hours going over records and preparing documents, a copy of the CCS, the case record basically, finally arrived. He'd personally filed for modification 6 times since he was sentenced with handwritten pleadings that were all denied. So the one he hired me for was a waste of time and would never be considered at all. Friend of mine is a defense attorney. He was representing a guy with a lengthy record for assault. Basically this guy took an AC unit and threw it at his girlfriend. My buddy tells me he was able to get a plea deal for 1 year probation, no jail time. The judge is all ready to accept the deal when he asks the defendant if he had anything he would like to say. The defendant responds, "Yeah, I don't know why they charging me with assault, I never touched her. I just threw an AC at her. This is bullshit." Judge rescinded plea deal because of defendant's attitude, lack of remorse. Went to trial and got a year in jail. Now you put it that way. Maybe I did hit the car. Simple is good. Just now saw a post of a guy whose defendant claimed that the parked cars were at fault, that he hit them. Or maybe some other drivers. Or something else. Definitely not him. Even though it's clear on a CCTV as day that he just didn't watch the road and scraped 3 cars. Still tried lifting the blame blindly. Some people are just sure that everything in the world is to blame. That's not them. Lawyer in the UK. I acted for a member of a famous pedophile hunting group. My client was charged with various offences relating to his vigilantism. Most seriously, causing grievous bodily harm with intent. He wanted me to fight the case on a public interest defense point that is not available to him in statute or at common law, contrary to my advice. I followed his instructions as I'm bound to do. If the state won't punish pedophiles properly, then it's left to men like my clients to take the law into their own hands. A horseshit argument for a whole host of reasons. His laptop was seized by police and submitted for forensic examination. He had a staggeringly huge database of child pornography on it. He himself was a massive pedo. Edit. Spelling. Edit 2. Spelling again. My father is a judge. I remember him talking about a case where a woman was suing for a severe back injury that she said was preventing her from working and taking care of her kids and so on. In the middle of the trial, a pen rolled off the table and she is bending over trying to reach it from her chair. But pen was too far away. So she stands up and bends over and picks it up and goes back to her seat as if nothing is out of the ordinary. My dad is just looking at her and she snaps at my dad and goes, "What are you staring at?" My dad asked her if she was okay and her response was that she was fine. Her attorney leaned over and said something to her and she then loudly started complaining about her back and how much her back hurt, but no one believed her, lol. Not me, but my legal studies teacher who used to be a lawyer was representing a woman suing a supermarket for a slip that caused her to hurt her shoulder. She had to tell the court how much it had impacted life and the fact that she couldn't do her everyday tasks. She said, "I can't even lift my arms like this to hang the washing," and proceeded to show the court the exact gesture in perfect form that she was explaining she couldn't do. Apostrophe. A postcard. While I was in law school, I worked in a state AG office. Administrative Appeals Division. Guy was appealing a huge tax bill for unpaid tax on his dairy farm's milk production. His entire defense and claimed basis for appeal was that he had zero notice of the requirements to report production, sale and proceeds. In initial disclosures, pile of discovery was a postcard from the state tax office from when he initially registered to obtain a state tax number. Very smart AAG laid low. Sprung it on the guy after he has cemented his position 50 ways to Sunday. Exploded his whole theory, resulting in big judgment. Moral. Read your own discovery responses and document production before building your entire theory of the case. One piece of paper can kill your client's position. This lesson has saved my bacon in 27 years of practice for sure. Credit card theft fraud case. When I was a young lawyer back in the late 80s, I was trying this guy on a CC case and the witness was the department store clerk. Before video surveillance, the state relied heavily on witness identification. As she described the customer that was purchasing the very unique clothing her store sold, I asked her how could she be so sure it was my client. She looked at my client, who was wearing the most obnoxiously yellow shirt imaginable, and said, because not only does he completely match the description I just gave you, but he's wearing the exact same shirt I sold him. The jury convicted him and I learned that day to better prepare my clients for trial. He'd sent a photo of his wife's beaten face to his wife with a message saying something along the lines of this: "Do you want this to happen again?" Double quote. He came across very well in court up to that point, but his mask slipped when that came out. Yay, sounds like someone I know. He can keep the mask on for a while, but it starts to slip when his perceived world isn't reality. When I was an intern at court, I was watching a battery trial with another intern. The defendant was asked if he can remember how many people were present when he beat up the other guy. He then points at my fellow intern and says rather loudly, "She was there but she didn't see anything. Don't trust her." Of course she wasn't there and the defendant was found guilty. A buddy of mine case as a public defender. A gal was busted on drug charges and told him she didn't have any drugs on her when they arrested her. He thought, okay, we'll use that. Turns out she didn't have any drugs on her when they arrested her because she just sold them to an undercover cop. He did pay the Haitian men to beat him up. I moved to dismiss the case based on the fact that they are Nigerian and not Haitian. Also, I countersue for 1 gazillion wacko bucks. Because of reasons. My client was the defendant in a marijuana trial. At one point while she was testifying, I noticed the jury looking down at her legs and feet. She had a tattoo of as marijuana leaf on her ankle. This was the 1980s. She had always wear pants to my office. She wore a dress to court. Guilty. Had a client charged with reckless driving for going 200 miles an hour with his pregnant girlfriend in the car. Dude showed up to court with a shirt that had a huge logo of Acme Racing on it. It was years ago and I can't remember the actual name of the racing team. Another client showed up in court very nicely dressed and had even ironed his jeans. But the jeans had giant marijuana leaves all down the front. At least he wasn't there for a drug case. Over my summer internship, I helped with trying to get some evidence admitted. The evidence was recorded audio of mental abuse over the phone, daughter talking to father. Lawyer spent a while trying to show there was no expectation of privacy for the conversation. Client went on stand and the first thing she said regarding the audio tape was that she always stays as far away from her daughter and lets the daughter lock her bedroom door, so that their conversation has the utmost privacy. It wasn't admitted, lol. Something opposite but worth telling. Years ago, I assisted an attorney whose client was caught in a drug sting operation. After meticulous review of the discovery info received, the officer who typed the arrest report failed to include that defendant, who was charged with possession of controlled substance, ever had possession of controlled substance. Guy was out that same day for time already served. Unfair dismissal case. My client claimed to have been unfairly dismissed from her accounting job due to poor performance. Her story was that they were just racist bullies. It turns out that she was running her own private accounting business with her own clients at her employer's premises during working hours, using their facilities. Her argument, when confronted with this fact, was that her clients would never have given her employer their business anyway. I actually did get her a small settlement because they didn't follow proper procedure when firing her, which is why I didn't know about the real reason for firing her. But it was peanuts compared to what she would have deserved if her story wasn't bullshit. I heard of a guy trying to appeal his disability benefit being revoked. He was supposedly a paraplegic, but the opposition had over 10 minutes of video footage of him walking, running and even jumping over a fence. After the 1 minute mark, the judge said, "Okay, I've seen enough. Please leave." Double quote. This is not my story, but it happened while I was in court waiting to be heard on a different matter. A man in his 70s had sued his wife, 50s, due to physical abuse. Apparently she had thrown hot water at him and he had burn scars on his chest and hand. The wife claimed that it was a fight where both parties were to blame and he had hit her first. The judge asked him if he had indeed hit her first, not wanting to incriminate himself. The man answered it is possible. Cue the whole courtroom having a good laugh. They were sent to couples counseling, but they definitely seemed like an interesting couple. My house was robbed. In addition to all the stuff the thief took, he also stole a bunch of my suits and all of my neckties. I had a big collection, like 100 or so. However, the thief left fingerprints on a hard plastic box that I kept spare change in. Fast forward 3 months. The thief is caught in the act of robbing another house in the same neighborhood. Same detectives on my case and this new theft. They fingerprint the guy and the fingerprints match the ones from my house. At the thief's arraignment, I see him strolling wearing my suit and my tie. I tell the district attorney. He says there's really no way to prove it. However, the tie he chose to wear was a one-of-kind street map of San Francisco and I still had all the documentation to prove it. The district attorney's eyes widen and he informs the judge. The judge has the thief placed under arrest again for possession of stolen property. The thief's lawyer was dumbfounded. It was a nice end to a rough situation. Custody case. Client failed to tell me he was previously convicted of felony child abuse for breaking 16 bones in an infant's body. That he was determined to keep answering the judge's questions in a poor way and not letting me speak once. This was a case against the municipality which denied his request to build a roof terrace. He exclaimed computer says no 3 times when the representative of the municipality brought up zoning plans etc to back up their argument to turn his request down. He was quite excited afterwards and thought it went pretty good. He lost convincingly. Oh, by the way, this guy was a lawyer himself. Clients lie and don't tell you important facts all the time. It happened to me last week. It's one of the most mind-boggling things when you're a young lawyer. But at some point you just learn never believe a word your clients say and do the best job you can. At the end of the day, I'm going home. Had a work comp case where a client claimed he fell off the side of his truck while putting a tarp over the load and hurt his back. It seemed legit as he was taken to a hospital and they had given him meds. As we were pursuing the case, it turns out the company had a surveillance camera. The injury seemed fishy to the employer, so they looked at the recording. It turns out the idiot had climbed off the side of the truck, then laid down on the ground and started yelling for help. He had made the whole thing up. No wonder employers question work comp injuries. This guy ruined it for the legitimate claims. Also not a lawyer, but my parents got sued by a man who broke his ankle real bad on the water meter next to our carport. Legally it should have been covered, but the house had just been built, with dad the project manager, and the yard was still a bit of a building site. The funny thing is the dude fell onto the water meter from the carport while robbing my parents. Anyway, he won the case because my parents couldn't prove that he was the one who robbed them. Client said his ex owed him a lot of money and that she was trying to get out of paying him back by getting a protective order against him. Seemed reasonable, so I took his case. At the hearing it came out that they were never a couple. That he was sending sex toys to her residence on a weekly basis and that she never asked for the thousands of dollars he gave her over the years. Stripper. We lost. He got laughed out of court and he learned a valuable lesson. Tell your lawyer the good and the bad stuff before trial.